But really today we're all about tapping into the collective expertise of the panel we brought here. We've got 90 minutes. I really hope that you've all had a very informative and insightful and I guess thought-provoking last 3 days, and I hope that the next 90 minutes provokes your thoughts even further, and that you've also had the chance to connect with your peers and actually pick up what's going on, because there's a lot going on. When Peter rang me and gently persuaded me to run the panel, as he's very good at doing, I had a look at the conference program, and it's very much focused on the evolving energy industry. Some pretty exciting stuff there, like pumped hydro storage and producing green hydrogen and offshore wind, and how we're going to cope when electric vehicles are the norm, not the novel, and how we create resilience for the future and we plan for those things. So these are actually really big, bold, exciting, and new things. And so to me, it's an exciting future ahead. It's also uncertain, and hopefully we'll fill in a few of those gaps and questions for you this afternoon. But I think, as Abraham Lincoln put it, I think the best way to predict the future is actually to create it, and that's the challenge we have ahead of us. So our topic today is all around creating access to those future electricity networks. These are the networks of the future users and the future uses. And blessed to have an extremely high calibre panel to help us in that debate. I've got Dr. Damir Novosel. He's the president and founder of Quanta Technology. They're a subsidiary of Quanta Services, who are a Fortune 500 company. And previously he was vice president of ABB Automation Products and president of Kema T&D. He's also an adjunct professor of electrical engineering at North Carolina State University. He's elected to the National Academy of Engineers, and he's served as IEEE Power and Energy president. He's also got, he tells me, 17 US and international patents. Then we've got Greg Skelton, who I'm sure is very well known to all of you. Greg's the chief executive of Wellington Electricity. He's been there since April 2009, just a decade, Greg. It's gone quick, hasn't it? A decade. Yeah. Before that, he was chief executive at Alpine and has held various senior management roles within the electricity industry. It says here you've got 30 years of experience, Greg, in production engineering, electrical engineering. I didn't realise you were that old. You started young.
1 year, 30 times.
Yeah. He's got a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering, a MBA, and is a fellow of the Institute of Professional Engineers. To Greg's left, we've got Dr. Stuart Johnston, who I think most of you would have heard from before lunch, an excellent thought-provoking presentation. Stuart's the General Manager of Network Transformation at ENA Australia, and so he's really responsible for driving policy and advocacy, particularly around network transformation and their network transformation roadmap. Before he joined the ENA Australia, he was Transgrid's Corporate Environment Manager from 2007. And before that, he had 15 years in environmental and asset management, teaching and research with the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service. Different, Stuart. And finally, at the end, Terry Paddy. Terry is the Managing Director of Cortexo. Cortexo are a platform provider. They provide a platform or tools to individuals and businesses to allow them to manage and control their own electricity use automatically or manually based on pricing signals. Terry actually began his career with the Royal New Zealand Air Force, spent 13 years in training and management positions as a pilot before he joined Ansett. And he's been involved with Cortexo as a director since 1999. Terry's also on the Electricity Authority's Innovation and Participation Advisory Group, or IPAG. So he's very well versed in the issue we're talking today, which is all about creating access to electricity networks of the future. He's not here in official capacity as IPAG, so his views will be his own, but he's certainly well up to speed with what's happening there. So, time to kick it off. Here's how we're going to run it. I'm going to warm up the panel here, a few easy pitches, just get a bit of context. It's your last chance to get questions and tap into the knowledge base here. So if you've got any burning questions, get them out. We've got a tick under 90 minutes, so I'm going to probably spend about half the time just getting these guys rolling and then throw it open to questions. Like any good engineer, I've got a sensible policy for when demand exceeds supply. So if you've got any questions you can't get to, Greg's kindly volunteered to deal with those in the bar afterwards. We haven't discussed pricing, but I know with Greg that it will be fully cost reflective. So anyway, let's start and get underway. And really what I want to do first is set the scene. So maybe we can start with Damir and run across the panel. I just want to...
Can I go to the bar now?
No, Greg. Do your 90 minutes. It's all about incentives, right? And I'm sure we'll touch on that. So let's talk about this electricity network of the future. You've heard a lot about it. Some of the panelists here will have talked to you, but I just want to recap and let's talk about what that electricity network of the future looks like. So Damir, do you want to start with that?
Okay. By the way, firstly, I was really impressed with Peter Berry's Master of Ceremony skills. Peter, you can get another job easily, clearly. So, and I do want to emphasize that I'm really impressed with the conference. I'm so glad I'm here. So we talk about future, and it was very interesting to listen to Stuart's presentation because there are a number of states in the United States that are actually going into the similar direction. So it's going more into the distributed energy resources, but in the United States we have 50 states, and it's very political. So it's funny that Sunshine State like Florida doesn't have many solar panels, but New York, because of Audrey Zibelman that is now in IMO, they have lots of solar panels. Okay, and of course you would expect that sunshine would be in Florida, not in New York. But anyway, so it's lots of regulatory, political aspect in this, but at the same time we are moving into the same direction. In the US, of course, there was a push for decarbonization. Renewables are key. Electrification is a key for decarbonization. So the push was originally for wind. So there were tax credits for wind. Because of the tax credits, lots of wind has been developed, especially in the Midwest of the United States in Texas. So, but then tax credits were winding down. Now the tax credits came for the PVs. So now there was a huge push for the PVs. So what we have the situation now that some of the utilities actually didn't expect that there would be such a huge push. So what we see now in the industry going forward, they will be much more decentralized, but at the same time, we see importance of having the balanced approach. That, and I do want to emphasize a very important aspect to me, is that when we talk about, and Stuart talked about it, value of distributed energy resources, they can help with this, they can help with that, reliability, capacity deferral, voltage issues and all. But we very often talk about benefits of DER, but not the cost of DER, while we talk about costs of the grid, but not the benefit of the grid. And I would really like in the future to get to that point when we say benefit of cost and cost of DER are this, benefits and costs of grid are this, and then we compare them and then create the future grid that will be more decentralized, but will have a major need for the T&D system, because I do believe, I completely agree with Stuart, electrification is the key for decarbonization and climate change, but the electrification needs the grid. And I think we need to understand that. So going into some type of completely distributed energy, distributed grid would not work. I mean, it could work, but it could be extremely expensive and would not really serve the needs for the society, as Rumey was talking about today, that we need to make sure that we address that. Enough for now.
Great. Jonathan.
Yeah, I think it depends on what sort of future you're going to envision, because it's very easy to talk about the really near-term stuff and kind of forget about what our role is to support consumers getting reliable, safe, cost-effective supply of energy. So the higher level future of where we're probably going is to work a bit more collaboratively together rather than actually work in isolation from each other as as a sector or industry. And a lot of that sort of comes out of the government's review of electricity pricing and the difficulty utilities are seeing around the world around customers starting to not resonate well with utility providers of any of the services. So you've really got to bring the customers back into being part of the future of energy, and an easy way of doing that is with some of the things that are coming into the market that's getting more affordable for the top 50% is trying to use that in a way that they can actually get another value stream off it. So if it's about electrification of transport fleets, we've sort of got 85% renewable, shifting pretty easily into 96, largely with wind, without too much effort. I think then electrification of transport is quite easy. So you kind of get this transportation idea and the whole idea of sustainability of getting rid of some fossil fuels and that. But the real value stream for consumers around doing something like that is what is the utility around having a battery of a scale that's 2, 3, 4 times larger than what's currently peddled with a solar set in your garage, and where's the utility in using that in different ways? And what are the incentives that could be in a market that actually gives you that extra utility or value stream off that investment? And I think we've seen this play out year after year after year. We've seen it with healthy homes. Those of you who are young enough, Peter Berry was in short pants, would probably remember it was all around energy efficiency. It never really flew because energy efficiency is, one of those panel sessions you get after lunch. It's quite hard to listen to. But as soon as you turned it around and made it about the health of the people in the buildings and the elderly not getting pneumonia and the young ones not getting asthma, that program really took off. So I think we as an industry have some selling and marketing to do, but also working more collaboratively across government, regulation, ourselves, customers, and our retailers. So I think if we can't tie that together, just having one part of the sector move, it'll spring back pretty quickly.
I'm going to say, what do I add to the conversation here? I agree with both previous speakers. Decentralised energy is the future. In fact, from an Australian perspective, it's actually a reality now, and we need to actually be trying to address that. The work that we're showing is showing that the networks are the key to actually that decentralised future. There's always this talk of the death spiral, and networks would no longer be required. It's actually the opposite. Networks are actually going to become more required to actually enable that future and actually to provide that value back to customers. But I agree, we have to bring customers on board with that conversation, and I think that's something that's actually been sadly lacking as part of across. Not just in Australia, but across the world, is that it's more that conversation has been held within networks, or it's been held within regulators or experts in the area, and no one's really explained it to the customers. And when you actually do engage with them, they actually understand this issue, and they can actually, when you actually talk about the value can be extracted from the DER, how it can bring down costs, how it can actually create a whole lot of value streams, not just for them, but for their whole communities, then they actually come on board. And I think that's going to be crucial as part of of taking this forward. That also part is that the issue we just talked about is collaboration, and it can't be just one part of the system actually coming up with an idea and actually trying to push this through. We've got to build this future with all the different components of it. So it's the regulators with the networks, with the retailers and third parties who will be coming on board as part of this process. We also need to be actually working with the customers themselves, actually building this to actually deliver what they need, what they want, and so they can actually extract the value that they could out of the system. If we do that, I think we've actually got a very, very positive future. There's a lot of work to do, but it's actually a really good, positive future.
So Terry, you're at the customer end of this. It's pretty good to hear. To the previous speakers talk about customers. Give us a customer perspective.
And that's why I'm sort of slightly removed here on the panel, because I don't want to be hit or everything thrown at me. And the benefit of looking at things from the customer perspective, or so from our perspective, we're the sort of what we like to call the entrepreneurial edge of the what's the future grid look like? Well, the future grid looks like nothing you're going to be able to control. The future grid looks like something you can shape and certainly, direct and assist with. There was a great question asked in Peter's keynote yesterday. Why would Google or Facebook be at all interested in the electricity sector, especially when we're talking distribution and transmission as opposed to straight retail?
Oh, I can talk as well. And why Google would be really interested? I mean, if you're really asking that question, you're missing a point. Just imagine that Google, with its little Alexa and everything in your house, is offering you little bits and pieces to optimize your solar and your battery and your electric vehicle, and they get you all connected up and give you free stuff for home automation. And then they go to their local distribution network and say, we control the majority of generation on your grid. Here are our conditions for you utilising that. And suddenly a network turns into a poles and wires administration company, and the intelligence layer, which is all the excellent electrical engineers, ends up being done somewhere offshore, somewhere else. Now that's why I'm allowed to say these things, because I can talk about any sort of hypothetical, and my network friends always say, just get a little bit practical, son. But they're the sort of things we're looking at. So there's another little aspect when we start thinking about that sort of stuff. We've got our networks, our network industries that have evolved through deregulation, and they've become privatised, and they're running around like good corporations. And there's a little bit of a move, a couple of articles being written around the world where communities now getting together and aggregating their electrical uses together under one name start becoming a public utility again. And so, reshaping how the whole industry is working. So what is the grid of the future? It's customer-centric, not outside looking in. It's people doing some stuff that we haven't even thought of yet, not us saying, trust us, we know what we're doing, this is what you're going to have to do. So what sort of things are we going to be looking at? We want to enable all those services, information symmetry, clear pricing signals, the ability for people to utilise or access a number of DER services, not just things that benefit distribution, but may benefit transmission or ancillary services, a whole bunch of things. I can go on for hours, so I'll stop now.
Thanks, Terry. Wow, really interesting start, eh? Start talking about a network, and people are starting about things like customers, collaboration, working together on things, pretty good. Balance, decentralised but not leaving the past behind, building off what's been done so far. So let's talk about, because our brief's about access, right? How, great to talk that, but how are we going to get access? So I'll start with you again, Terry. Who wants access and why, from your perspective?
So this is a real hard question, because I get this a lot. We get a lot of people inside the industry saying, customers don't care about that. Customers aren't interested in their 2 kilowatts that they might save over a 12-month period, or all those sorts of things. Well, customers aren't interested because A, they can't access services that give them better benefit than that. And the reason they can't access those services is because they don't exist. And those services don't exist because the sort of organisations that can create grid edge services and provide them back in can't get through the siloed walls of the industry to be able to provide them. So what are we talking about? We're talking about being able to identify, let's say, on a network where there's congestion. How would we do that? Australia's got excellent sets of network heat maps which identify areas where there is a problem or congestion. I've got to point out right now, before I start saying stupid things, I'm not an electrical engineer, I'm not a market trader or participant. We just look at the problems and try and identify some potential solutions. So if we can identify where there are problems on the outside, while the network obviously knows those and they're trying to do their own thing, do we strengthen, do we buy some services, do we put in some batteries or something else? Why can't the outside, the users, the people that want to both use and provide these services, why can't they offer up solutions? And the problem is, so they're the sort of people that will use open network access in the future. How? We identify where there's an issue, and maybe the developer of a new suburb says, hey, I'm building a new suburb in this area and I see you've got a whole bunch of potential constraints in that area coming up. So instead of you spending another $100 million that you'll charge me $110 million for, why don't we roll out solar and batteries in our whole area and work out together how we might be able to solve some of those problems. So we get right down the future user of these sort of open networks or open access to networks will be the consumer, but the consumer will, the individual household consumer, but they will never get there until there's some real simple, oh, I just got offered, because I've got a solar battery, I can only get, 6 cents a kilowatt hour, 8 cents if I sell it back in. But if I sign up to this new organisation, they promise me some different services and some different things, and it's really easy to do. You've just got to remember that Uber, before it was Uber, was just a guy with a car saying, take a lift with me, and you couldn't really do that and charge money because the regulator might get upset. But once a platform became available that could match up suppliers and consumers and make it really easy for the consumer, push a button, track it on the phone, suddenly a whole new industry started. And that's what we'll see as the sort of people that want to access these services. So can't say today, give me a definitive list of everything that'll be there, because the exciting part of this trip was they'll just emerge.
I'll give you the right reply, Greg. You've got a network, right? People want to access it. I'm sure, you run a level playing field. You've had open access since we've had separation. So what do you say to what Terry's laying down the gauntlet a bit there, I think? Huh?
I really appreciate particularly the comment on simplicity, because we also need to remember we are consumers as well. Am I right? We all use electricity. So I sometimes try to put myself in the position, I'm a consumer. And what do I want? What's important to me going forward? And what's important to me, and let's compare our notes here, it's simplicity, it's still the cost, is the reliability and safety. You don't want to have any safety incidents, safety issues. You want to have a reliable system, because at the end of the day, if there is no electricity, people very often die. So we can talk about all the other infrastructures, as I mentioned before, but without electricity, so that's why it's somewhat different than sometimes some of the other businesses. And I think that's what I would like to also convey my opinion on this. At the same time, simplicity, again, is the key. In the United States, we have the two developments now happening. PV installations, as I said, are booming. But to be able to have that open network, it's very important that people that want to put PVs have an easy access. People that want to put electrical vehicles have an easy access. And some of these states, again, they have a regulatory pressure. Utilities actually have the maps. It's called hosting capacity maps. And they're publicly available. So you can go on the internet, actually you can Google Southern California Edison. That's one of the utilities. They have a really good system. You can check it while I speak. You can go there and you can check all the circuits, and they have different colors. So let's say it's green, you can say you can connect your PV, no problems. If it's red, then you have an issue. So now the consumer or the developer, let me put it that way, has a choice to decide how to manage this. Of course, if it's red, then the issue is that somebody has to pay for this because it requires grid upgrade, okay? So this is one aspect. The other aspect, and I think Luke alluded to this, is there is now community choice aggregators that are happening in the United States. So and it's very interesting. In California, state regulators basically are switching people from the utility to community choice aggregators. So, and actually I don't like that, because as a consumer, I don't have a choice. Government is telling me who should be my provider. Again, isn't that what we don't want? We actually want to choose. So people don't even know. They just get oh, this is your new provider.
Didn't you choose your president then?
Let's not go there. So you can, of course, go back and switch back to the utility. But how many people will do it? Again, it's the issue of simplicity. So at the same time, in North Carolina, you have a situation, they have a community choice aggregator, and basically it's the same story like with Uber you mentioned. You know, there are two guys that qualify for a community choice aggregator, and they go to consumers and say, switch to me, I'll be providing you electricity, and I can promise you that your electricity will come from renewables. So if you're liberal, and I'm now going to be using only renewables. Of course, we as engineers know it's kind of silly. You cannot kind of pick renewables, they're great, but that's beyond the point. The point is that is the choice, the consumer has a choice now and say, I want to pay a slightly more, but I feel good about it because I'm promoting renewable generation. So a couple of topics.
Yeah, access is a big question, I think, and a lot of it is around the industry hasn't really educated consumers that well and probably haven't really educated the rest of the industry, I think. The problem that we've got, a lot of this choices that customers are going to purchase of generational storage is going to all hit the low voltage network. And I think people don't really understand that when they move into a subdivision, buy a home, whatever, then that connection seems to be pretty much endless. You can pretty much turn anything on in your house and it all goes. There's no really interruptions or nothing really blinks and says you've got to turn something down to make the rest of it work. So I think there's to Damir's point, we have to sort of socialise what the LV network is capable of actually supporting, and also providing people with the knowledge of the areas that we start to shift the ethos around of what we're managing into getting support from the customer rather than actually getting the customer to be purely a price taker. But to do that, it goes back to Terry's point, you almost got to set up a market or a platform for that to happen so you can get visibility of those things occurring. That's quite a long way away, but if there's a no regrets position, which is probably more New Zealand centric than the US or Australia, it's probably thinking about if we are going to get government starting to think about electrification into transport fleets, then maybe the no regrets position is to start to think about incentives of charging 24 or 48 or 65 or 90 kilowatt hour batteries, how that works in a network peak demand situation. So if you talk to the market regulator, it's all about cost-effective pricing. We've had a wee play with that. The 1,800 electric vehicles in Wellington, there's 100 on cost-effective prices, so quick as a flash that hasn't really happened. As much as we've influenced and trialled that. But that again is really educating the coalition of the willing to start to understand that, a bit like any sort of low control process, it's really the customer that's going to be the last party that gets affected by this. So there's a bit of thinking around that, and trying to develop a dialogue with the motor vehicle industry, consumers, retailers about what some of the impacts are of these choices. When we're speaking to some of the larger providers of the newer battery electric vehicles, the 65 kilowatt hour ones, the showroom staff just let them roll off the floor. There's no talk about electricity, apart from getting a cheaper power bill, but I can't work out how 65 kilowatt hours gives you a cheaper power bill. That's counterintuitive. So there is quite a bit of education we need to do, quite a lot of hand-holding, and I think Stuart's quite right in saying there's still a way to go to actually, and I suppose it's a challenge for the industry, particularly the distribution industry and transmission. See Steve Jay's here, president of EEA. He's one of our homeless in Wellington, so we've got to look after him. And it's really trying to think about how we actually socialise the issue of what's going to happen and the requirement of getting the community to be educated to how they can help support the distribution network and transmission grid with some of the choices they're making. I don't no longer sell fridges or freezers, contrary to popular belief. I'm not going to be selling electric vehicles or solar or batteries, but I do need to educate people about what they can do to help when they use those and called upon by their retailer or aggregator, how they can support the network, which is really a service we'll be looking for in the future of asking people, retailers, aggregators, how they can actually package up a service with their customers to support parts of our network. And I think Terry's quite right. There'll be a heat map showing where we're going to have more congested areas rather than less congested areas. And that's basically where Andrew Renton lives. I think Andrew's here. We'll probably talk about that later.
To where things at in Australia, Stuart? You kind of seem to be somewhere in the middle between perhaps Greg and Tamir.
Oh, look, I'd agree in terms of the issue around that. We need to actually be having that conversation with customers around technical constraints, what's the hosting capacity in those areas, and those heat maps, and we've done that sort of work. But the other question that comes in around that is, in terms of that socialisation, it's also that other question about fairness. Now, we've got a whole issue around connection to networks, and you can say, and particularly in areas which are long, skinny feeders, and maybe the first 5 people came along can connect to the system no problems. It's the 6th person that wants to come along that actually meets the constraints. So the issue there is it fair that that person's been constrained off? Or do they have to pay extra money to actually upgrade the network to allow them to have access? And so there's a conversation going on in Australia in terms of how do we actually, is that something that we actually need to do for that person, or is it something that we need to actually socialise so that that cost is smeared across all of the users, or is it something that we need to look at that everyone, we actually go back and actually renegotiate the connection agreements for all people in that area so that everyone's got equal access, and you can actually buy and sell or trade that access. If you don't have a system, you can actually sell it to someone else, or you can actually look at other ways of actually doing this to actually to create it. So I think there's a whole conversation in that area that we probably need to do. Particularly, as I said, we've got areas of our networks. As I said, we've got fully meshed areas where our hosting capacity could be up around 80%, whereas other ones is only going to be around 10%. And we're talking about fairness. We're talking about trying to bring them on board, but you also need to actually make sure that people are aware of the differences between where they are in the network and what that actually means. And the solutions are actually bespoke for each of the individual customers and areas.
Cool, thanks. So, like, I'm kind of hearing a lot of positivity, but then, you know, we're servicing lots of issues here. So I'm just gonna ask an open question to the panel. So, are we looking at opportunity here, or are we a challenge? Where are we at in that cycle? You know, it's the old thing of sometimes it's hard to you forget the objectives when you're up to your neck in the proverbial and the alligators are snapping at you, that you're actually there to drain the swamp. So where are we at? Are we you know, starry-eyed, or are we actually starting to butt up against some real tough issues, you know, and it's getting a bit hard?
Yeah, I think the secret is to stay out of the swamp. And that's really trying to, at a regulatory level, just paint the picture of what would happen if we basically keep sitting on our hands and looking at the US and Australia for the solution, because it may not come from there. I think the connection agreements with customers is important. I think they need to shift away from static to being dynamic. An example of that happened in the UK, where Ofgem put up a fund, a contestable fund for the distribution networks to put in innovation projects, and we're keen for that to happen in New Zealand if there's any Commerce Commission staff here. We're looking at our reset, and we think there'll be some funding in there at a low level which might form a club of lines companies to come together and share that funding to get some projects off the ground. But the fund largely meant that one of the projects that UK Power Networks were successful with was to actually remove constraints of wind coming onto distribution networks. And what would happen is we'd have a rule book, and the rule book said that the wind is going to dispatch at this level and the network's going to be congested at that level, therefore there's going to be constraints when these things work counter-cyclically, therefore we'll just have to curtail the wind from actually injecting at that time. Now, that really doesn't happen that often, and the ability to have a dynamic connection agreement is you stay connected until the constraint actually occurs, and then you do something about it then, rather than actually saying, well, we're worried a constraint may occur, therefore we won't let you actually dispatch. So those sorts of things are very important. So if you do turn up with, say, a very large demand at an ICP, the idea would be to actually create a dynamic agreement and say, look, help yourself to the network as much as you want. It's all there for you. When it hits this limit, though, we are going to curtail some of your demand or some of your injection so it does support where the network's at. And out of that creates a perversity that the people who have made that investment, if they are truly looking at getting a return from the market, may end up saying, well, we actually want to pay for that constraint to go away, rather than actually constrain them on day one. So it does actually allow the network to start to operate in a more dynamic way. It allows people to actually start to connect, but dynamically you've got a conversation that you will be asking for permission to turn down purely to make sure that the people that are buying storage and generation, and this really plays back to affordability and fairness, aren't actually forcing payments onto people who aren't actually disrupting the low voltage network. So it kind of gives that fairness there. So to answer Jonathan's question, there will be some no regrets positions we need to take around putting in some managed services or managed devices to make sure we get better visibility of the low voltage network, but better visibility of the causes of some of this disruption before they actually start to disrupt, and therefore we can start to manage that ahead of time rather than wait till the problem occurs and then try and reactively try and manage it, which is kind of a classic way of battling a crisis.
I was going to say, just to go on from that in terms of is it a problem or is that negative or a positive, I actually think it's probably the best time to be part of this industry. It's really exciting. There's a lot of stuff going on in here. It'd be great to be a young person coming into the industry at the moment. The opportunities, the possibilities of where we actually take this are going to be great. And for people in the industry at the moment, just in terms of the interest in that and how we actually take that forward is going to be, again, really exciting and taking it forward. I think the issue is that we need to actually have a coordinated plan for what we do. A lot of the time we talk about things in terms of some of the issues we're facing about this, and we talk about the technical issues and we try and solve those, but you can do that, but you also need to think about the social aspect. You need to think about the regulatory aspect. You need to think about pricing, and all of these aspects. You come up with a holistic plan to actually look at this and actually try and solve them. I suppose that's why we've tackled the problem we've got in Australia the way we did, because what we were seeing was that people were going down bespoke ways to actually solve a problem, which is great. It did solve a problem for themselves, but all of a sudden that didn't actually mesh with the next network or somewhere else or some of the other, or it couldn't be allowed because of the current regulatory regime or something like that. And so if you actually got a plan, you bring all those different stakeholders on board and actually be part of that conversation, you can actually go through some of these issues. Yes, you may not get a full agreement on everything, but you can at least come up with some common ground and a common vision, and everything's actually building towards that, and that's probably the way forward.
Yeah, I second that. I think that's such an important aspect to have that plan and strategy going forward. What is our end goal? And then how we can get to the end goal. And when you ask the question about opportunities and challenges, I think there are huge opportunities to make the delivery, and I don't even call about the grid better. I want to say the delivery of electrical energy better. But challenges come very often from not having the clear picture. As Greg was saying, we need to have clear pricing, clear regulatory constructs, and I'll give you concrete examples. So let's say there was a push after wind, PV, okay, now storage is coming as a technology that is going to maybe not be panacea, as you mentioned during your talk, but it's very important. So in California, the state regulator says, okay, you shall install 1,240 megawatts of storage, so about 1.3 gigawatts of storage to be installed by 3 utilities. Okay? Sounds good. So utilities say, okay, this is our task. If we install storage, we are going to get 12% return on investment. Okay? So do they worry now how beneficial the storage will be, how cost-effective the storage will be, or their goal is to make money? Okay? So what is happening, storage is acquired by purchasing department, operations are not even engaged. Because why would you involve operations? You know, you don't really care about operating it in the right way, life cycle management. To me, that's the key for storage is life cycle management, not just purchasing it. And of course, there are certain applications, you know. But the problem with this was you choose to put storage when you have a place in the substation. Okay? That's the main decision. Criteria is to put the storage where you have space. Okay? I don't think that should be the main criteria. I think the criteria should be what the applications you have. You should decide the size and location based on the benefits the technology provides. So now what's the outcome of this? So storage is installed and it has some good benefits, don't get me wrong, but it's not generating the benefits that people would like. And then there is an image. Storage is too expensive. So how many people you'll hear that say storage is too expensive? And I'm not saying it's cheap, don't get me wrong. But of course, if you approach it in a wrong way, it becomes a challenge. It's not an opportunity anymore. Because the opportunity is, let's identify applications when we can put storage. And we find those applications. Then a regulatory construct comes. Fortunately, in states like California, storage can play on the market. So they can do frequency regulation. Also at PJM, one of the ISOs, they can do frequency regulation. So now storage is not a conventional asset. It's not a generator. It's a generator and a load. And it can be held in distribution, transmission, generation, lots of applications. So now if you stack the applications, suddenly it becomes more cost effective. But if the regulators say, oh, no, I'm sorry, you cannot use storage for frequency regulation if you are using it for capacity deferral. I say, why would you do that? Oh, but we have the rules, you know. And again, coming back to your point, we need to look forward. What's the best for the consumer, for the ratepayer? What's the best goal? And if storage is good, and again, I'm not saying it's easy sometimes. If you use it for capacity deferral, you may not that easily use it for frequency regulation. So I'm sorry. I just don't want to go into too many technical details, but I do say, and there are possibilities to do it. So we just have to do it the right way. And I'll say something, I want to add one comment here. And I apologize if I'm now coming from the US or whatever, and now telling people in New Zealand how things should be done. I really apologize for that, but I was actually really excited to hear how New Zealand system is operated now. It's not easy to operate the relatively islanded system. Okay, so we have North Island, we have South Island. It's still, you know, you don't have that huge network around you to help you with if you have reliability issues and all. So frequency can go a little bit up and down and all. But it's 80% now renewables. Am I right?
85, yeah.
85. It's wonderful. So you have hydro, you have geothermal around Rotorua, so things are great, okay? But now there is still a limit. I mean, how much more hydro you can have?
Not much.
Not much, okay?
Hard to conceive.
So now what's the next step? Where New Zealand should go from here, okay? And I really apologize, but just a thought, maybe I'm completely wrong. I'm saying now you look into, let's say, wind. Wind blows in North Island on the east side of North Island. Actually, it's North Island southeast, am I right? There is lots of wind.
A wee bit of Wellington, just a wee bit. Tiny bit.
And like Wellington, I understand when you fly to Wellington, you know, I didn't have that experience yesterday, but it can be windy.
2 days.
So anyway, long story short is that there is a great opportunity now to look into these new technologies. How, for example, wind and storage could be put together. And how now transmission system and distribution system can serve. So now, if you look as a regulator, and we heard a presentation from Dave Prentice. That was very passionate, good presentation. What's the future of the New Zealand? I mean, this to me like a golden nugget here, okay? Let's focus on this. And there will be PVs, you know, in some areas, don't get me wrong. You know, we talked about PV panels on the rooftops and all. But that can be a really nice plan made. And then, what do you guys think? Am I making sense here? Okay, so I'm not completely obese. Good. And I'll finish now with my last point is transportation. You know, Dave was asking on Tuesday, what are the solutions? What should we be doing? And I'm saying, actually, electrification, because New Zealand already has all these renewables. So how much more can New Zealand contribute to decarbonization? And decarbonization is a worldwide issue. And I always joke when Germans say, we don't have any more nuclear in Germany. And, but France has lots of nuclear. And the nuclear is 20 kilometers from the border of Germany. But people in Germany are very safe because they don't have any more nuclear. So I couldn't resist to tell that joke, in a way, the story. But the point is, New Zealand is doing much, but still, if you want to go further, electrification, buses, transportation. I mean, that's a huge potential for New Zealand to actually get further with decarbonization.
Terry, do you want to, you're blessed in that, you know, often in industries that see things as challenges, other industries have solved them before, you know, so I'm interested in your perspective around some of this stuff.
Well, I guess that's a bit of a hard one. I don't think we've solved any of this. What I was going to say around the question of is this opportunity or is it all, you know, what's going on, is I absolutely agree. This is the perfect time for anyone to be in this industry. That the change, which is exciting, is hugely transformational. And we're going to win if CEOs of network companies are like Greg and want to collaborate with other ones and invest money in R&D, as he mentioned before with ComCom looking at that little segment. So for me, from the outside, with my little whinge at the beginning about, you know, can't access things and do all that, I see things like the network transformation roadmaps on both sides of the ditch as absolutely fantastic. It would just be great if we knew that every network was going to do that and how it was going to be done. And I know that there's issues that are different for every network, but from outside the tent, if we knew that this is where we were headed, then there would be things that from an external innovation point of view we would start working on immediately because we would know that there was a return from them. What we don't want to do in New Zealand's case, and this is the thing that drives every one of us in the commercial sector nuts, is have 29 different systems for 29 things.
This is just a question. From an Australian perspective, we're utilising things like the Energy Security Board to try and coalesce some of the directions we're trying to take with the roadmap and some of the work we're doing. So it's using the key stakeholders as a group, like the AEMO, Australian Energy Regulator and the rule maker, to bring them together to try and help get ownership of that, to actually drive that, which will then drive back into the networks. Is there some sort of body in New Zealand that could actually do that as well?
I'm probably the wrong guy to ask, Greg.
Yeah, I think there's a Security Reliability Council that is looking at those sorts of issues around what these things are going to do. But with transparent system operators, they're also very, very keen to understand that we don't destabilise the grid with these things coming through, so it has been talked about. Yeah.
But one of the things that I really like, and I think is really important in our environment, and someone had it on a slide in one of the presentations I was at, PowerCo did, your own industry transformation roadmap has set out quite a exciting vision for the future. All sign up for it. ComCom is starting to, in a regulatory sense, you know, talk about mandating monitoring of low voltage network. Doesn't that sound exactly the same as what you've got on your network transformation roadmap? And then the IPAG group came up with recommendations for the EA board, the regulator board, to say we need more visibility. To me, what I see on the outside is that all the individual entities with their own particular, you know, bent on everything are all actually heading in the same direction. So let's all just row the waka in the same way and get on with it.
Yeah, let's continue this discussion, because I'm kind of, you know, it strikes me that to get to this nirvana and this new future, you need to bring everybody along with you, right? And so I'm kind of interested in that because I see some of that stuff too, Terry, but then I hear from other people, you know, different views from the... Actually, I should check. Are there any regulators in the audience? Right. Well, there's our,
Right, right.
there's our first problem, right?
Right.
You know, we need to bring. So how are we going to do that, Greg? And then I want to circle back to Stuart and Demir just to see how it's working in other jurisdictions. Because if you don't get them along with you, we're stuffed before we started, aren't we?
Agree.
Yeah, so you got to be careful with the question you asked, because I think the regulators are very in tune with not trying to pick our future for us, and you'll see with the regulatory reset which happens next year, we go away from a price form of control across to a revenue. So basically what that allows us to do is have the flexibility of obtaining enough income to actually avoid the risk of actually losing by a bad decision going forward and losing income from our community. So they're taking a responsible role. They're not there to tell us what the future is going to look like. So, and they're all there for basically long-term benefit for the consumer. So you've really got to manage the regulator in a way that you start by managing the customer, because if you know that you're about to make a change, the first question or second question, first one's how much. Second question is, what do your customers think about this? So if you can actually go and get your customers engaged with what you're doing and they see the benefit, and I think Stuart highlighted that really well in his presentation, that we all had this view about what the customer thinks as engineers, and of course we're right because we engineer everything to the nth degree, and we're right because we think we're right. Go talk to the customer and they're thinking about something completely different. So bringing the customers in, having a chat, finding out what it is that they're interested in. One of the 3,800 mistakes I've made in the last 24 hours is assuming that a cost-effective price will shift people's behaviour because it's about money. In fact, it wasn't. It was about shifting charging of vehicles outside the 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. because it was more sustainable for the planet. So it had nothing to do with what was happening in my business, absolutely zero. It was more about what they were doing for the wider health of the country and the world. So once you start to see those things, and we've seen them before, we've talked about the healthy home example, you've really got to start to think about where is it that you engage with your communities in a way that they start to understand where you want to take things and start to understand that by working together that they will get benefits out of this, rather than what they've seen in the past is the price goes up. And doesn't matter who it is putting the price up, the price goes up. This really has an ability to defer investment for slightly longer, and also rewarding people with paying for services. Completely different model, but it's something that will actually endear yourself to your customer if you start to talk in that way. Even Transpar as a customer would like that idea.
How's it working in Australia, Stuart, with the regulators? Have you changed the dialogue? Have you...
Actually, it's a really good point. So, obviously, the work that we've done in partnership, obviously, with AEMO. The work we did before was with CSIRO. But for both those processes, we actually had the regulators as observers. So they weren't actually a partner of the program because, obviously, they needed to be impartial. But what part of it was actually making sure they were actually part of the process the whole way through, and it actually gave them confidence in the process we'd gone through to actually talk to all the different stakeholders, and that we actually had agreement across stakeholder groups so the things that we were coming out with were actually seen as being accepted, and that's probably really good. So particularly from the AER's perspective, the AEMC as a rule maker, we've engaged with them slightly differently. Yes, they were a little bit of an observer, but they've been engaging with us about. They are understanding that there is change to be made, but what does that mean from a regulatory perspective? And so we've actually given them the ownership of that part of the work to actually go forward. And so they just ran a workshop about 2 weeks ago about, all right, if we are going to go to one of these frameworks, how will that actually impact on our regulatory regime, and how would we need to change that? Because you're not going to just step to another regulatory regime, as we're not going to step to the new technical parameters. So the idea is, what's the step changes that we'll need to have as we move along that pathway?
So I understand the point that regulators shouldn't pick up choosing winners and losers, but they do. If they provide tax credits for certain technologies and they have regulatory targets, they actually effectively choose winners and losers from that perspective. So, but I would like to emphasize, I really like the point that regulators are like the customer. I want to give an example. IEEE, I'm putting my IEEE hat on now. We developed memorandums of understanding with Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, with NERC, North American Reliability Council, and the Department of Energy. It was exactly the point was we as, and again I want to emphasize independence and objectiveness in this approach, and emphasis on technical independence and objectiveness. Because in this room, here we have vendors, we have academics, am I right? We have utilities. We have people involved in all the aspects. Unfortunately, we don't have regulators, but I can tell you regulators are actually members of IEEE or SIGRE for that matter as well. So the objective was to actually work with them and provide the technical knowledge so that when they make decisions, they understand technical aspects. I believe the biggest issue for us, biggest challenge, has been that regulators very often get bombarded by certain people with agendas, business agendas. They want to make more money, and they convince regulators that certain things are more important than the others, okay? And that creates a problem, and challenge how we run the system and all. So to your point, Greg, if we can work more with the regulators, have more discussions, more meetings, and again, as you did in Australia. By the way, for that matter, I mentioned to you, Australian Parliament came to the US, and we organized a meeting with the representative from the Australian parliaments with IEEE experts. And I wanted to make sure that in that group, there was a diverse group, including the vendor, including the utility, including the actual system operator. So that it provides that independent objective perspective. So I think it's really important that we have like a strategy and plan how we can do this and use forums like this, EEA, great organization. Let's use EEA to communicate to the regulators. And it was really good to have Dave Prentice presenting. I just wish he stayed. That was my point I made. Because when he said, I don't know, some of you were there, he said, let's be quiet, because he's a civil engineer. And my point was, let's not be quiet. We actually want to be communicating what our thoughts are. And I want to tell you one more aspect. And I heard actually yesterday, somebody mentioned that you are worried about solar flares. Am I right? So in the US, there was a big push about solar flares, and now is the big push that I don't think it's going to be in New Zealand, but it may be in some parts of the world, of so-called HEMP, high altitude EMP, electromagnetic pulse, because there is a fear that some rogue nation will put a pulse in the nuclear explosion that will then disable the electrical grid, okay? And again, don't get me wrong now. I'm not saying that we shouldn't address those type of concerns, but other the priority. When the fire happens in California and utilities were pushed to do GMD, and then in California they are kind of south, they don't really have, usually you are closer to polar caps, you have more GMD impact, that's the, okay. But they were pushed to spend time and money on doing this. And then fire happens. Now it's all this issue as you guys heard. So my point is regulators, just think what the priorities are. Where do we want to, if earthquake is much more important to address and spend money on than GMD and hemp, okay? So please don't, because some consultants come to you with hidden agendas or some vendors come to you, they try to sell devices, don't listen to them, please. Go to the organization like EEA, SIGRE, IEEE, and let's work together, to your point. Then we will have that success.
I wouldn't mind just adding to that is that issue around trust is a huge issue. Yeah. I know when we first started the process with the roadmap 5 years ago, the networks were on the nose in Australia, and there was a whole lot of issues that we were trying to do this work just to try and further the nest of networks. But through the process of that project over the 2 years, and then what we've done since that with Open, it was actually, they've come to actually trust, they've actually seen that they've actually been heard, they've been part of that conversation, all the issues that they're addressing are part of that, and so that trust has been built up as part of it, and so they actually trust the outcomes and what's coming from the process, which is why we're getting acceptance on it. So it's, I think that's a really important component of whatever you do, is making sure that you actually by bringing those people on, you'll actually engender trust in whatever transformation you're trying to push through.
And I was just going to throw in a comment about, obviously, the regulator's doing a wonderful job in New Zealand because Greg quoted their statutory objective for the long-term benefits of consumers. So obviously he's drunk the Kool-Aid in that one. But I was going to point out that just from when you look at a group like the IPAG, the sole purpose of that is for industry to advise the board of the EA on topics that they're interested in where regulation may be inhibiting future innovation and opportunity. So they're looking at how can they break down those walls to stop this whole, oh, but the rules don't say that. So I think the regulator's quite engaged.
I want to circle back to a point that you made, Stuart, around what an exciting time it is to be in the industry. And, you know, the audience here is full of men and women that are all charged in some degree of keeping this great machine operating. And so I'll throw this to the panel. What if you were a young engineer entering the industry today, what's your advice to someone like that? You know, what would you say to them? What are the sort of skills you'd tell them to focus on? Because I agree, it is an exciting time.
Yeah, so being over 50, I've got Alzheimer's, so it's pretty hard to remember what it was like as a young engineer. I think the key thing is there's quite a good scheme that Business New Zealand run with Young Engineering Professional Network, and there's a number of people engaged in that just in mentoring, and it's fascinating having conversations about the differences of people at the really early part of their career and where they want to get involved. I think the key thing is just confidence and just asking for really big stuff and get involved in it. And don't rely too much on the senior people in the organisation. Sure, they'll be the safety net to make sure that you don't come to harm, but make plenty of mistakes. I'd rather have an engineer making mistakes than a safety engineer that doesn't do anything. So that's really useful learning. And I think the other thing is just network in the industry, but also, and these things are fantastic for that, and Peter and his team does a great job, but also try and network outside your industry. Try and go to places that have gone through great change. If you listen to people that work for Spark and where they've gone on their journey, it's just absolutely fascinating where they've been disrupted, or talk to people that are doing things that are quite different. Think about what your toughest job would be if you weren't doing the job you were doing, and then just go find out how those people deal with the issues that you've got in front of you around health and safety, or around managing innovation, or dealing with customers, because you get some really key things when you do that. And to them, it's just BAU. To us, it's absolutely fascinating that they do it in a very, very different way. And that's what I do. I just stay really, really open. Ask plenty of questions. There's no such thing as a dumb question. They're all reserved for me. And just go out there. So yeah, it's a fertile area, but just be careful with social media, because don't believe everything on social media. Lovely place to post stuff, but just be mindful. And I think the other thing that young ones, I think, are good at, and I can say that because my kids are over 20, is just look after the well-being of the people around you. I think that's something that we probably, as our generation, didn't spend enough time on. And I think that's a really good thing to pick up. And because you're very socially engaged, that's something you're probably doing better than some of us older blokes.
So, firstly, Dr. Romay mentioned that the future of energy is in electrical energy. Am I right? And I think we need to sometimes communicate more to the high school students that if you want to be in an exciting area and you want to make a difference, this is the area that you can make a difference. You know, what I was talking to Professor Amesh from University of Wellington, and he was telling me how lots of people do in high school, they do projects related to solar power, to renewables, to whatever, but somehow they don't go to the electrical power industry. They go somewhere else. So it seems somehow we need to put a little bit more effort on communicating. Things have changed. I know 20 years ago we actually had a huge issue. There was this aging, not just aging infrastructure, but it was aging workforce issue. And because kids were not going to electrical power schools anymore. Things have changed. So now more and more kids are still going to power schools. But it's not, I think, at the level and with enthusiasm as I think we deserve to have. Because we still have that image of, power industry is this old-fashioned technology. But think about the things that we've been talking at this conference. I mean, isn't that exciting? So my point would be to young generation, communicate also to your friends, colleagues, and maybe we need to have some type of marketing approach, something on TV, or actually, I'm sorry, TV is the old technology, on media, on Twitter, or something to communicate what we feel, how our industry is exciting.
One of the things I would say about in terms of the youngsters of the day is, I suppose when I started in the industry, I remember the first huge staff I had, they were all about 20, averaging around 50 years old, and they'd all been working in exactly the same sort of jobs for the last 30 odd years. But that issue now, that status quo of actually just is changing. The issue of the workforce is going forward. It's going to be more adaptable. It's going to have to be, it's dealing with those new ideas and be more innovative. People are going to be looking at, there's opportunities everywhere in terms of, you don't have to stay with your own organisation. There are startups, there are other bodies that will actually be working with it. And so you can actually, the opportunity to change and actually to move and actually progress where the industry's going will be there. Will be lots of opportunities for the young engineer of the future. Also, from an international perspective, not just from within New Zealand, there's also what's going on internationally. And a lot of the countries around the world where there's still issues around people having access to power at all, they're looking to how can they actually modulise power for them so you can actually raise the conditions in those sort of areas. So if you're looking at excitement for that, it's not only within your own country, but you can actually go overseas and start looking at how you can actually change and actually make a difference in some of those sort of places as well. So personally, I think it's a very exciting time.
So I'm not qualified to answer because I've never been an engineer, let alone a young engineer. But I think what I've heard, though, is exactly, I think, the perfect things. Engage outside your industry. Look outside. Try and work out in the supply chain, other people stand in their shoes and see why they're demanding of you the things that they are, so that you understand the drivers for that. And given that everything's moving to digital and the world is really just a giant software platform with a whole bunch of other things underneath, maybe from a young engineering perspective, engage in your local software community and the industry groups around software, because I think you'd find that you'd have a place in there, and before you knew it, you'd have your own startup ideas and you'd be off doing stuff, because that domain knowledge that you have as an engineer is the basis of everything.
And I really want to just add to this, that if you want to be engineer electrical power field these days, it's such a broad thing. You need to know a little bit about storage. You need to know about telecommunications. You need to know about PVs. Am I right, guys? I mean, I see some of the young guys there in this room. And that's challenging, but it's also a great opportunity. You need to know, you mentioned software, human-computer interaction, and all the other things. So, but it does require that broad knowledge more than ever.
Some really great advice there, I think. I'm actually going to open it up for questions from the floor. I've got a few other questions, but I just don't want to deny people the opportunity to ask questions they might have. So, yeah, maybe we'll start over here. No, you're okay.
Rowan Sinton speaking from Meridian Energy. In this panel, we're talking a lot about customers and what's best for them and the future for customers, and we're all, focused on that. What I worry about is that in this session and in this conference, we've forgotten that we're not actually the average customer. Electricity consumers in New Zealand, a lot of them are not buying EVs, solar panels, they don't have robotic lawnmowers, they're trying to heat their houses, and they're trying to send their kids to school with full bellies, right? We know this. I loved Vic's keynote yesterday because I think she best acknowledged the social and political challenges that we're facing coming up, especially around things like social equality. I mean no disrespect to the panel and our distinguished panellists here, and thank you for coming, but I think the lack of diversity and representation here is actually a bit embarrassing. The IPCC has acknowledged this recently, and they've started employing social scientists to come onto their panel because the physical science is so well known, and we now know that the social and political issues are the harder ones to solve. So should we be having these conversations about the future and customers with this sort of representation we've got here today?
Yeah, thanks, Rowan, for asking that question. It really was the target of the government's advisory committee review around electricity price, and is it actually still able to actually meet society's needs or society's capability to keep on paying for what we keep delivering up. And it became pretty obvious, and you're from Meridian, so you'll probably understand the stratification between our current market, how it rewards people for switching, and you've got ones who don't switch, and therefore they're paying for the win backs and everything else. So, yep, there's some work to do. One thing we decided to do is we couldn't understand what was meant by the term energy poverty. There was no definition provided by the advisory committee. We joined up with ERANS, Electricity Retailers Association, and we picked, with them taking the lead, 50 homes in Pairua, which is a low-income suburb of, city of Wellington. And we all had ideas about what it could mean, but what we didn't want to do is leave one of the government panels with the idea of it was all about electricity and electricity price, and it will be solved by lowering the price. I think there's much more things we can do with communities who are on low incomes around what is happening with insulating of homes, what is happening with other services that they don't know how to actually get, that you and I would get in a heartbeat or a phone call or something like that. So it really sort of goes back to that early premise of educating the people who are underprivileged. And it's kind of, we don't operate strictly on social licenses in New Zealand. We do in our other places around the world that we operate. But it's really kind of taking that social license approach to what you're doing with the parts of the community that they won't get reached by what we're talking about in here, and how we actually manage that. And we sort of learnt this probably about 3 years ago in Victoria, where the government of the day in Victoria, the state government, were very keen on cost-effective pricing. So our largest sister companies, Powercor and CityPower, had this really fantastic model, and it was really good. The thing about the model is it advantaged 85% of the community. So it's a great headline number. Tip it on its head, it disadvantaged 15%, and you've already told me who that 15% is. There was a change in government in the state that year, and 2 consumer groups complained to the new government, and cost-effective pricing is no longer in Victoria, never started. So you're right, unless we take all of our society on that journey, we're not going to get there. The solution to electric vehicles is an interesting one, because if we jump forward far enough in our vision and we think about where electrified transport fleets are going to go to, it wouldn't be out of the way to think about providing transport as a service for low-income homes. So the idea from a ICCC decarbonisation of getting the 10, 15, 20-year-old cars off the road, it just take away from those low-income families the need to buy a $3,000, $5,000 car, paid $2.50 for petrol, and to simply give them access to electric vehicles, which probably only going to cost $11,000. You put a number of those into a fleet, into a low-income community, and run vehicle as a service. So the whole idea of charging those and leasing them is much cheaper than the ownership of a private vehicle. So I think we should go there. I think that's where we should go. Because you're right, when we talk about electric vehicles, we skim across the top and maybe miss 66% of our community who won't be buying them. So the idea is to say, politically, if we're going to get this over the line, we've got to have a solution for the people from an affordability and fairness point of view that it stacks up as well. So I'm not trying to be a vehicle manager, but we see there's companies in Wellington who are starting to lease vehicles at the top end of the market. I think we need to think about how we set up a company to lease at the bottom end of the market and have vehicles as transport.
Yeah, so, and I would like to add, during my presentation, I emphasized this, that when we talk about electrical transportation, we do not talk about Teslas. We are talking about buses, fleets, that, to your point, Greg, I can't emphasize more, will help disadvantaged communities and low-income people, for sure. So that's why I'm saying that, in a way, a little bit of a silver bullet for decarbonization, addressing some of these social issues. The other piece, to me, is as we are moving forward with these PVs and all, I might have mentioned it on Tuesday, but I'll re-emphasize to your point again. Incentives and tax credits were allowing people, rich people, to actually put PV panels. So what happened was that net zero metering that became very popular to promote, because of course PV manufacturers like to sell their PVs. And so government says, okay, we are going to give tax credits, we are going to promote net zero metering, meaning that you can actually sell the power to the grid, so you actually can double dip because you use for your load, but then if you have excess power, you sell it to the grid. And then the grid is, of course, infinite storage, because at that point in time, whoever has that PV doesn't have to pay anything anymore, okay? So it was very clear that rich people, that poor people were paying for the rich people, because poor people could not put those PVs, and that's not good. So what I'm saying, we need to, the regulatory construct, be careful of unintended consequences. And academically in the United States, there is a push to address this. For example, the microgrid that's been built in Chicago is built at Bronzeville. You can go to Bronzeville, and the VP of ComEd, Shea Bahramirad, is the one that is driving this issue. The whole idea was to select the disadvantaged community and build the microgrid there. So not to go and select the rich area of the city and do it that way. So there are ways to address your issues if we put some focus on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. I actually think it's really essential that we actually bring customers along as part of this conversation and the workshops we actually do. It was actually one of the key aspects we actually designed into the roadmap in Australia, was that with the workshops we held across that, we actually put money aside to actually fund consumers and consumer groups to come along to those workshops, so they could actually be part of those conversations. It was actually essential, otherwise it was just industry people with industry knowledge actually just talking to ourselves like we normally do. And yes, that's great, we get great outcomes on that, but we haven't actually taken into account some of the fears or issues that the general customers may or may not want. The other aspect too, we did a lot of modelling around consumer requirements as part of that to actually try and help direct how we were actually going to build the roadmap as part of that process. Going on from that, we've actually continued that through the open process, where again we've funded some of those community advocates to come along to those workshops, both the broader ones and the deep dive. But we also worked with Energy Consumers Australia, which has been brought together to represent the consumers, to actually, they also funded some of the smaller groups that are actually out there, so looking after just particular like council areas and things like that, who came along to some of those workshops to actually be part of that conversation. And again, that helped us get a more balanced view in terms of the findings we got. So some of the submissions we ended up getting on the consultation paper weren't just from all your networks. Yes, they all provided submissions. Yes, all the third parties, but we got individual customers actually sending, or ones that were actually representing certain groups, who were actually putting into this as well, so that they saw that their voice was being heard, and also they could see that some of their concerns were being addressed. Or if there was issues that they weren't sure about, we could answer those questions for them as well. So we'd say, because it's a no-brainer for us why this is happening, but they didn't actually understand some of that. So we worked out we needed to actually put more work into actually that engagement to say why this is needed, what benefits it actually have, what's the consequences of not doing this, and what actual value you'll actually get back as a customer. And that's a really crucial conversation to have. And one of our actions that have come out is that we need to have, because of that, a broader engagement strategy to actually take this to the wider communities across Australia. Because if we want these people, all people to engage on this, to actually do that, then we need them to actually understand what and why and what the benefits are, and be part of that conversation, or at least be aware of it.
Terry, anything to add?
No, I've got it.
I think there's another question just there.
Mahmood from PowerCo. I'm a humble engineer. I'm not so young, old enough to go through the challenges of engineering and being an engineer. I appreciate talented panel here with all your experience and credentials. But I think my interest is when you talked about the basically exciting time for engineers, people to become engineers, or young people. But the issue is that, yes, it is exciting if they can manage to go through the uni to get to the workforce, and then to go through the challenges and ups and downs of the workforce. Now, I suppose engineering is not so rewarding, I mean, not just from the money point of view, but from the security of, job security. And I heard that people were sort of blaming parents for not encouraging their kids to go to engineering. I wouldn't advise my daughter to go to engineering because I've been through that. Now, I suppose, it's all, I respect you a lot. I have a huge respect for you. But I think you guys are probably a little bit out of touch with the challenges that engineers have to go through to get to the point. And it's difficult, really.
Just to let you know, my youngest daughter is an engineer. Okay, so I'm a little bit in touch with this, and I'll tell you the story. So she was in high school and looking about what should she be, looking at the universities and all the stuff. And one day she comes to me and says, I was thinking about being an electrical engineer, but my friends told me you're a girl. You should not be an electrical engineer. Okay? I was really pissed. I said, don't listen to me. I'm a very opinionated person, as you guys know. So, don't listen to these idiots. They have no clue what they are talking about. So do where your hearts take you. Okay? And actually, she did decide to be an electrical engineer. And I respectfully disagree with you. I think electrical engineering is a great profession. I think it's actually not that difficult to find a job as an electrical engineer. I can tell you, my company hires constantly people. We are actually now competing, and maybe it's different in New Zealand, I don't know. But in the United States, it's a huge competition for good electrical engineers. So it's actually very easy to find a job, and it's a stable job. You go to the New York Stock Exchange, or you want to do some other stuff, it's much more unstable. Engineering, you do your job, and you have choices. You can be technical, you can go to management, whatever. I always advise people that the choices in engineering are really, really good. And it's a very stable profession. And my daughter shows that. She bought a house in Sacramento, doing very good as an electrical engineer. My other daughter, on the other side, decided to do something else, and I can tell you she's been still struggling, okay? So that's my experience. And again, I'm saying I just have that, but I have more examples because I hire in my company lots of young engineers, okay?
I'd also just say I've been doing some work in this area because of the work we're doing around roadmaps and that. And part of that actually is not just all the things we've talked about here, but it's actually the workforce as well, the skills component that actually goes with it. And yes, look, in Australia, a couple of years ago, we had a huge change up and shake up, and there's a lot of people went out of the industry, but now we've actually discovered we've got a huge shortfall. We've now got an integrated system plan that we're now identified that we've got a massive shortfall in terms of both engineers and just trained lines people and substation staff that we're scrambling to actually fill that. We've got issues with all these different third parties coming in and actually connecting, and again we've got people who don't have the right skills to actually to fill that. And I chair our vet system reference committee and the idea around that is we're actually trying to change our skills and how we actually do that, and how we actually make more adaptable so we can actually try and breach that skills gap. But it's a big issue that we are facing at the moment, and so I would say there are lots of opportunities out there at the moment because of that, and because if we actually create more adaptable skills, instead of being shoehorned and maybe your job disappears, it means you can just move into one of the other areas around that. That's also what we're trying to do with some of those skills areas. So you're not lost to the industry, you just move within the industry to where you can actually do something better. Yeah.
Thanks, Mark Mood, for your question. I think it's fantastic. It's been my life's work to become out of touch. It's something I've aspired to be for quite a while now. And if I'm in touch too much, then I don't need those young engineers to actually do all the fantastic engineering work. So I aspire to that. Usually I stay in Wellington to get abused, so it's nice to come to Auckland to get a bit of a hassle. It's great. Normally our board papers are a pack of about 16 for the main papers. I used to present most of those. Now I just present one, and we've got 15 other people who present the rest. We have monthly presentations. They're called CEO presentations, but there's 10 speakers, and unluckily one is me. So being out of touch, I think, is quite an aim of mine. And the more I'm out of touch, the more the engineering gets done at a better level. And the more I can sit and think about what the future might be without me at the helm. So it's actually quite a good thing to do. And I really respect you and thank you for that question. So it gives me more latitude to be more out of touch. So thank you. No, none taken. It's a wonderful question. I think you're quite right. It comes back to Rowan's diversity question. That you have some old heads here and they talk about the future as if they know the answer. We don't. But all the young engineers in the room, they'll get there. I'll be long retired in my rest home, dribbling into my cornflakes.
Sarah, do you want to add anything?
No.
I think Brian had a question. Probably last question, I'm afraid.
Brian Leyland Consultants. I assume we all agree that our objective is to provide a reliable and economic supply.
Yes.
Good. In that case, I'm confused that you are so keen on wind and solar, because the evidence is that the more wind and solar you have on a system, the higher the price. Very, very convincing evidence. The countries that rely on coal and gas have lower prices, and one of the countries with the lowest price of all is France with nuclear power. So why aren't you talking about nuclear power, seeing you happen to believe that carbon dioxide is some evil gas? Now, just to go on from that, today, the New Zealand power price is 3 times what it should be, there is no wind and the load is very high. What's going to happen when you get 3 times or 5 times as much wind as you've got now? Where is it going to come from? If you think it's going to come from batteries, it costs about 30 or 40 cents to store 1 kilowatt hour in a battery. A factor of 10 might get them to economic. And finally, according to Lomborg, if everybody followed the Paris Agreement, the world would be 0.17 degrees cooler by 2100. The whole effort is futile, even if the carbon dioxide fairy tale is true.
Oh, it's a pity we're out of time, isn't it?
I was just going to say, like, a lot of the stuff we're doing is not just because of those policies. In fact, we don't have direct policies in terms of where the federal government's going in terms of some of that stuff in Australia. But what's actually driving it is actually the customer choice. The customers are actually making that choice in Australia. Yes, it started off with incentivisation for solar and solar panels and batteries, but a lot of that, if you look at what's happening in Queensland and Western Australia, those incentives are gone. They've actually been taken out of the system. Now, Victoria's a little bit different. They've just made a government policy announcement, which is causing us all sorts of grief, but that's because we thought they were going to be another 10 years before they needed some of this stuff in place, and with that government policy setting, they are now scrambling to actually be in the same boat or where South Australia and Queensland are.
Brian, we could go on for quite some time.
Yeah.
And I think that, and I'm just conscious of time too, but I think the point you're missing is the future's all about customers. That's where we started. It's all about collaboration. You have one view in a society. We're all different in here. That is the challenge for the electricity industry, to recognise the differences. That point was made earlier about diversity. So you're entitled to a view, but not at the expense of everybody else's. Yeah. And you know, I'm not supposed to be speaking, so I'm breaking the rules here. Yeah. But look, I'll say this. You know, right at the start of this conversation, I don't prompt anybody, the whole thing about customers and collaboration came through really strongly. And so that's really pleasing to me. And I think if I was going to take anything away from today, I'd take that away. And I just want to thank the panel.
Can I just comment? I really...
We are really tight on time.
I just want to...
So I'm gonna cut you off now. Okay. I'm afraid. I hate to do that, but look, I just ask you to. I think it's been a fantastic discussion. We've traversed a lot of areas. I just want you to join with me and thank the panel for their contribution today.
Yeah.
All right, look, thank you so much. It's the close of the day now, and we've got a couple of things that we need to deal with. And I'd like to thank our panellists. I think that was a really tremendous discussion. There are clearly lots of challenges and clearly lots of solutions. And I think it's just about enabling that discussion and some of those solutions to actually be delivered. So we're now at the point where we announce our Best Paper Awards, and it's my pleasure to invite Richard Pearce up to make these awards. Can I just say from a personal perspective, I've been hugely impressed with the quality and diversity of the papers that we've had out there. Really, really awesome, and I just want to thank all of the paper presenters for that. It's been a great event from my perspective. So, Richard, over to you.
Thanks, Peter. We won't take much more of your time, but thank you for hanging around till the end of closing of the session. Listen, it's my pleasure again to convene and chair the Best Paper Awards panel, and just want to extend my gratitude to all of the chairs and judges that have worked over the conference over the last few days. And also extend a thank you to all the abstracts that we received this year. I think, as Bob Taylor mentioned on the opening address on Tuesday, we received a record amount of abstracts and applications for papers, which we could only accept a number, I forget which number we had, about half. So that's really good, so I encourage you to keep doing that. And I've also witnessed some really good quality papers over this week. So we have, we have 5 awards to present today. The first award is for Best Paper for a Member. And I'm pleased to announce that that goes to Phil Bunnage and Sean Allen for their paper on building resilience for our Port Township. Is Phil and Sean still here? There they are. Peter will make the presentations and no doubt get a photograph. While they're doing that, I just want to make special mention to those that were very close. It was a very close decision around this paper. So special mention to Andrew Renton, Alan Miller, and Campbell Hammond for their papers in this category too. So a round of applause for all of those people. Second category is for Best Paper Non-Member, and that goes to Stephen Butler for his paper entitled Integration of Remote Offshore Energy with High Voltage Direct Current, HVDC. Stephen's from PSC. Is Stephen still here? Anybody else from PSC? Peter Brown will happily. And in this category also, special mention to Dr. Therese Milford and Dougal McQueen for their papers in this category too, if they are still here. Best student paper this year has been awarded to Andrew Berry. Andrew still here? He is. For his paper called Big Things in Small Packages. He's not talking about his beard. He's the only presenter who in his bio suggested that people do make note of his beard and congratulate him on a top effort, so well done. If you haven't already, please extend your appreciation to Andrew and his beard growing skills. And in the second last category is the IET Best Presentation, so this is just for the presentation component of the paper, and that's been awarded to another student, Chirag Ishwar, for the paper entitled Offshore Wind for New Zealanders. No? Actually, I'm not sure. University of Canterbury or Auckland, I think University of Auckland, is it? He is University of Canterbury? Oh, sorry, I don't have the slides here. I do actually. Great. And then finally, the People's Choice Award. Let's have a show of hands for people who've used the conference app this week. Keep your hands up if you voted on the People's Choice. That's about right. We need to improve that. People, work in progress. Very good, thank you very much. And the People's Choice Award goes to Samed Shahzadi, paper entitled Efficient Distribution Network Recovery Following Natural Disasters. So please join with me again in congratulating all of our Best Paper Award winners this year.
All right, Richard, thank you very much. And can I also thank the judges and the committee that came to these very difficult decisions, because it was such a great range of papers. It's now my pleasure to invite EEA President Stephen Jay to make some concluding remarks. Stephen, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. It's my small task to basically close the conference and say a few words. I could go, that's it, but that would be a bit rude because a lot of people have been involved in terms of pulling this event together. So I have a small list to run through, and so bear with me. There's quite a few people to thank. So I'll start with our international keynote speakers, Drs. Novosel, Dr. Lee, and Dr. Johnson from the US, China, and Australia, respectively. Without your international perspectives, it's always very interesting to hear what's happening overseas. Now, those people couldn't have appeared without the help of the IEEE, Seagrey, and ENA Australia, so my thanks also goes out to them. David Prentice, Vic Crone, Peter Brown, in terms of our local keynote speakers, thank you for your contribution as well. I'd like to thank anyone who produced the technical paper and those who had the courage to actually come up on stage and present it. Who likes presenting? No. How many engineers do you know who like presenting? Even smaller numbers. So those people who presented, extremely well done. For those who are out there in the audience, have a go. It's really not that bad. Getting out there talking about what is happening within the industry, I think is absolutely vital at events like this to share that wisdom with your peers. I'd like to thank the event sponsors, particularly the major sponsors, PSC New Zealand, and also the platinum sponsors, Counties Power and RPS Switchgear. I'd like to thank all of the people who appeared in the trade exhibits. Who likes going around looking at all the gadgets that are out there? Yeah, absolutely vital. I was a bit disappointed with Broad Spectrum, who wouldn't let me fly their drone around the hall, but they have promised me that I can have a go out in the field, closely supervised. I'm going to take them up on that. I'd like to thank all the session chairs, all those people who sat at the front and coordinated what was going on, and also the judges who typically sat at the back. They're all run by volunteers, and their time, which is very precious, is very much appreciated. I'd like to thank the paper award winners and also the other award winners this week. I'm also going to thank you all for showing up. I'd like to thank your companies who enabled you to get here and for you to gain that professional experience and that professional development time. I think it's fantastic that your employers and yourselves actually appreciate and enable that to happen. Who likes catching up with other people around the country? Yeah? This is such a good event for networking. Plenty of time not to mosey around and look at all the fun toys, but also to get up there, catch up with old contacts, form new friends, form new contacts around the industry, share some information. I really like those aspects. Who likes being in the media? We have two media partners I would like to thank, Energy News and also Transmission and Distribution. They've taken information from this conference, from you all, out there to the wider world. I think that for an industry is really important. So thank you for supporting our conference as well. We've had a small army of student volunteers. Again, volunteers running around with mics, sorting everything out. I believe they're Auckland, Canterbury. Have I missed anyone out? AUT. So again, thank you. I know some are at the back, some are probably over here. Fantastic job. Also the organising team, Peter's team, and also the conference coordinators. Amazing job in terms of putting this event on and making it happen. It runs like clockwork, but it only runs like clockwork because of the clever skills with those people. And I'm always extremely impressed in terms of how it comes together. This year's event has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed catching up with people. As you know, presenting is not my favourite thing, but I encourage you all to come up here and have a go at next year's event. Next year's event is going to be in Wellington, and we're already making plans in terms of what that's going to be. The last thing I'll say is the EEA is much more than just an annual conference. It's a members association that allows us to connect some of our thoughts together, some of our problems together, to form some really good solutions. If you'd like to get more involved than just come into this conference, please get in touch. Yep, there's an exec committee, but there's also an asset management group, a safety group, and now a professional development group. If you've got ideas or time or would like to contribute, please get in touch. We're more than happy. Despite the hair, I've got big ears, yeah, and I would like to listen to your views in terms of what would make this organisation work for you and what you need. So just on that note, I will declare the conference finished. Safe journey home, everyone. I look forward to seeing you all next year. Thank you very much.